We care for organizations in HR, but is anyone caring for us? What is the state of HR's mental health? Well, some insights about that is coming up now. Hi there, I'm Andrea Adams. This is the HR Hub, and on the show we talk about anything related to HR. I encourage you to subscribe to the show or to the podcast to keep learning from my fantastic guests. So today my guest is Dr. Jo Burrell. She's a clinical psychologist and has spent years working in mental health services. She's been making waves on social media because she's been studying the well-being of HR. And at the time this is published, around the end of January 2026, her survey will have just gone live and will be available until late February. You should do it. Links are in the show notes. Hello, Jo. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. Lovely to be here.
Well, lovely to have you. I'm really interested in this. This is going to be fascinating. So I'm going to start with like a curiosity. Like you're studying HR, but you've never worked in HR. How did you end up doing a survey about us and about our well-being?
So, as you mentioned in the beginning, I worked in mental health services most of my career in the UK's National Health Service. And about 10 years ago, just over now, I set up a company called Ultimate Resilience alongside my business partner, who's also a clinical psychologist. And we were really interested in working with employees and employers because we'd actually been seeing lots of people in our clinics who are suffering from mental health issues that really had their source in the workplace and in people's experience at work. And HR professionals became our customers. So they were the people who were commissioning our services largely, weren't necessarily utilizing our services, but they were commissioning them. And so we were getting to know lots of HR professionals. And then the pandemic happened and we noticed a shift. And this shift was that suddenly HR professionals were reaching out for help for themselves in a way that they'd never done before. And we just said, what's going on here? Why is this happening? This is really interesting. And of course, we got to know lots of HR professionals because, we'd been doing return business with lots of organizations and we've built relationships with HR people who are commissioning our services. So we were hearing anecdotally about the challenges that they were facing in their jobs. And so the first question we asked ourselves was, what data is there out there about the mental well-being of HR professionals? So we duly went and had a look. What did we find?
Nothing. You found nothing.
Indeed. We found almost nothing. So I guess that's where we started. We said, well, let's create some data then. We're hearing from people about the struggles that they're facing. We know that the pandemic is a particularly challenging time. We know, my gosh, HR professionals were right on the front line dealing with everything landed on their laps during the pandemic, didn't it? So we said, let's make some data and see what happens. And we've since conducted our survey another time. So we've conducted it twice so far. And as you said, we are just in the process of conducting the 2026 survey. And that is open currently and people can have to click on the link in the show notes, as you said, and add their voice to this kind of growing picture of the mental well-being of HR professionals.
Okay, so from did you do it in 2025? And if so, what were the main findings of your survey?
Yes, so we had almost 1,500 respondents to our 2025 survey. It was open during February of 2025. And the survey is designed because we are clinicians by background. We wanted to make sure we used clinical questionnaires, standardized, statistically valid clinical questionnaires that were going to give us some really meaningful data. So this is what this survey is made up of. It's made up of clinical measures of things like depression, anxiety, burnout, psychological well-being, and so on. And the main findings, well, I guess we can probably expect that they're not going to be, no, they're not going to be pretty. They were actually a lot worse than we expected. We were shocked ourselves, even though we were hearing anecdotally from HR professionals how much they were struggling. They were really stark. So what we found was, in terms of depression, in terms of our measure of depression, 44%, so almost half of our respondents, met the threshold for clinically significant symptoms of depression. Now, we looked at the data for the general population, so Office for National Statistics data in the UK, and we compared that with that data, and we found that that figure of 44% is 2.5 times higher than we would expect to see in the general population. So then we found, in terms of anxiety, 38% met the threshold for clinically significant symptoms of anxiety, and that is 1.5 times higher than in the general population. So we've got a professional group, a set of people who are not only struggling with their mental health, but they're struggling with it significantly more than we would expect other people to be in the general population. Okay. And in terms of burnout, we found that 63% were likely experiencing burnout, according to our measure of burnout, and a further 15% were at risk of burnout. So there we've got 78% of people who are struggling quite significantly in terms of burnout symptoms. 67% were in the range for low psychological well-being. And then we also asked, are you considering leaving the profession of HR? And 42% said yes, they were considering leaving. So again, that's almost half of our respondents. And of course, we don't know whether they've subsequently left or what they've done, but they were certainly thinking about it. And we don't know why they're thinking about leaving the profession, but I think we can make some educated guesses, links between these findings around people's mental health and well-being and that particular finding around thinking about leaving the profession. We also asked people if they'd taken time off sick in relation to their mental well-being or other sort of sources of, stress. And 23% said that they had taken time off sick in the previous year. And that is slightly above the national average in the UK.
Is the survey attracting people who are unwell? Because I'll say, for example, me, I don't feel like leaving HR and I don't think I'm depressed or anxious. So is it just attracting people who are like, I need a voice, I need to fill out the survey?
Sure. I mean, we don't know, because this is a
Mm.
self-selecting sample.
Okay.
You see the survey being advertised, and you make a decision to contribute, to take part. And that might be for a number of different reasons. People are motivated for all sorts of different reasons, aren't they? Maybe they know someone else who's struggling. Maybe they're not struggling themselves, but they know other people who are struggling. Maybe they're particularly happy in their job at that particular time when they fill in the survey. Maybe they are really struggling. Maybe they've had some time off sick. Maybe they are off sick from work with mental health related issues. So we don't actually know. We don't know the answer to that question. I think it's very possible that, a good proportion of the people who responded to the survey were people who are directly affected by, feel that they are directly affected by mental health challenges. Nonetheless, I think this is a very stark set of data, and even if what we're saying is 1,500 people, almost 1,500 people, were motivated to respond to this survey because they were struggling themselves, that's quite a lot of people.
Quick note before we continue. I'm an HR consultant with a practice here in Alberta, and I help small and medium businesses navigate people, crises, emergencies, and that can be things like terminations, investigations, too much turnover, too many complaints. But I don't stop there. I will help with this crisis, of course, but then I focus on recovery so that it doesn't happen again. If you know of a business owner or leader dealing with a workplace situation that has become a crisis like that, I'd appreciate an introduction. You can find my contact information in the show notes or just send them directly to my website. That's the hrhub.ca. And now back to the conversation with Dr. Joe Burrell. Um, so in your studies, in your professional life, what are HR people dealing with that's pushing them towards being unwell?
We
Mm-hmm.
actually asked people about their main sources of stress in our survey. So I've not shared all of our data yet, but one of the questions we asked was what are your main sources of stress? So we could start there. Okay.
Okay.
And we had a list of items that people could tick, and we asked them to tick the three main things that they felt were sources of stress. So this included things like attrition rates and legislation and lack of training and those sorts of things. And these were the top three things that came out as main sources of stress. So workload, 50% of our respondents said workload. 41% said poor management was their main source of stress or significant source of stress.
Is that poor management of them as individuals, or like the fact that we are partnering with leadership managers? Which managers are we talking about? Or did you?
We don't know. Now, we did get some qualitative information. So we did have an
Mhm,
open text box where we asked people to just add other information they wanted to add in relation to that question, what are your sources of stress? And
mhm.
in those responses, we did get some people talking about their direct managers, so their management within HR, and
Okay.
how problematic that was. But we also had people talking about, the senior leadership within organizations, the C-suite.
Mhm.
So I think that figure of 41% who said poor management was a big source of stress for them, it's a mixture, likely to be a
Okay.
mixture
Okay.
of HR
Okay.
management and wider organizational management. And
Yeah.
then the third one out of the top three was lack of support. 29%
Mm.
said they felt lack of support was a significant contributing factor to stress for
Mhm.
them.
Mhm.
So the conversations I have with people, I suppose these are some of the things that I've gleaned. So one of the things is the HR role has changed massively in
Mm.
the last 20, 30 years.
Mhm.
But along with that change, a whole load of other raft of other roles and responsibilities have been added to HR's plate, if you know what I mean. So well-being is one of them. HR professionals now have well-being in their remit, well-being strategies, well-being initiatives, etc., etc. So they're
Mhm.
now the people that you go to around well-being related issues. And then, of
Mhm.
course, we've got all the ER stuff that's, I think, the world, we know the world is a much more complex place now, isn't it?
Yeah.
We've got the living crises, we've had the pandemic, we've got, global, disturbances, wars, all sorts of stuff going on. This is a very uncertain time for human beings on this planet. And so if you work with people, that you're going to be seeing that in your day-to-day interactions with people in the work that you're
Oh,
doing with
yes.
them. So
Yeah.
HR professionals are telling me that even things like ER cases are so much more complex now than they used to be.
Yeah. They surely are.
And
I
so,
uh I heard sorry to interrupt, but I heard a term, and it just seems to relate to what you're saying. This idea of toxin handler. At HR, we are toxin handlers,
yes,
and that, we get supervisors in our office like upset and frustrated with their employees, and we get employees in our office upset and frustrated about what's happening to them in the workplace that they think is unfair, that they are exhausted, that they are not well, and we are handling it all. And
absolutely.
there's better, good and bad ways of handling it, but it just seems to me that that must also be part of it.
I think it is very much. And I guess that's where what you do intersects with what I've been doing in my career. And I guess that's why I've become so passionate about this topic, because I identify with
Mm,
you in that role. I know what it's
mhm,
like to be on the receiving end of people's trauma, of people's anxiety and stress and their feelings of uncertainty that they've got about work and the
mhm,
world. You know,
mhm.
I know what it's like to be the person that the buck stops with. And I think that, as a clinician and someone who's worked in settings where I've dealt with those kind of things, what I'm aware of is that I've had a source of support all the way through my career called supervision, clinical supervision. And HR professionals don't have that. So that is
What is clinical supervision?
so many healthcare professionals and, some people outside of healthcare, but I think it's probably most commonly utilized in healthcare settings, um, have a source of what's called personal and professional development, which is called supervision. So it's a
Mhm.
it's a regular meeting. It's a bit like coaching or
Oh,
mentoring,
okay. Yeah.
but there are models, supervision models that are there that talk about the functions and roles of supervision. And as I said, it's a personal professional development approach. So it's there for you to develop your skills and knowledge and expertise. But the personal bit is it's also there to support you in terms of the emotional impact of the work that you're doing. Now,
Mhm.
I know looking into HR that you're also experiencing that. You're working with people who are experiencing distress and difficulty and challenge.
Mhm.
You don't
Mhm.
have that system of support in place. And
Mhm.
I think that's been a real problem. So what's happened is the profession has changed massively, but in line with those changes, there hasn't been thought to how do we support HR professionals with all this additional stuff that they're dealing with the impact of all of this.
Um, in the data, were there any particular surprises besides
Well,
how bad it is?
yeah, I mean, actually, it kind of connects with what I've just been talking about. So, one of the questions we asked about was whether people feel supported at work in relation to their
Mhm.
well.
Mhm.
And I think that the data that we got this time round, the 2025 survey, um, was particularly important. The findings around that question were particularly important. So only 13% said they felt well supported. So that leaves 87% who feel that support is lacking to some degree. And actually, in terms of the way that we divided the data, about half were saying they felt it was lacking very significantly. So they were saying that they either have no support whatsoever or supported very rarely. Okay, so around half of our respondents, it's severely lacking. Okay,
Hmm.
so that was finding number one. And we because we had quite a good response rate to our survey, so like I said, nearly 1,500 respondents. We were able to sort of interrogate the data, and we were able
Hmm.
to look at the people who feel they're well supported. Okay, what does their well-being look like? Are they thinking about leaving the profession? And have they taken time off sick in relation to their mental well-being in the last year? So we were able to kind of look across the data and ask that question. And what we found was perhaps not surprising. Okay. So you're feeling well supported at work, then you are much less likely to be suffering from mental health issues. You're much
Mhm.
less likely to be burnt out. You are much less likely to be thinking about leaving the profession. And you are
Mhm.
much less likely to have taken time off sick in relation to your mental health in the past year.
Mhm.
And I think that's a really, really significant finding. And actually, in terms of its statistical significance, it was very powerful. Those findings were very,
Yeah.
very powerful.
Yeah.
So I think that's really important. And I think it leads us to another question, which is a question we didn't ask in our survey, is what kind of support are these people getting?
Yeah.
So, I think that's a really interesting question,
Yeah. Um, what I'm really curious to know what's going to come out of the next survey. But
Mm.
what do you think some of the solutions are?
Well, if people want to download our survey, so obviously the 2025 survey is still available, and the 2026 one will be available from about April time this year. So certainly in our last year's survey, we talked a little bit about what our recommendations are in terms of tackling this, crisis that
Mhm.
seems to be present in HR. And one of the things that we talk about is that we need to be tackling this problem from on a number of different levels. I think that one of the things that I see, and I don't know if this is something that you experience too, but certainly in the UK, one of the things that I see is when I do see information for HR professionals about how to look after their mental well-being, often it's about it's very much focused on individual actions. It's very individualized. So it's about self-care, essentially.
Yes.
And I find
So
that a bit annoying, I have to say.
can I stop you?
Yeah, yeah, go
I
on.
did an interview. This was actually a few years ago, with someone who's just like who just put it all on the employer. If you're going to set up overly demanding systems and uh, and you're going to treat people badly and all of this stuff, what do you think you're going to get? I mean, she was a bit brutal about it, but it has come up again since. Anyway, sorry, I just had to say that.
I think it's important that we acknowledge that we have to think about all those levels. So, I know as a mental health professional, that we have a responsibility as individuals to look after our well-being.
Yes,
There's no
true.
point,
Absolutely.
I could go, my workplace could be the healthiest place on earth, but if I'm drinking 10 pints of lager a night and eating a takeaway every night and not doing any exercise, then, I'm going to be unhealthy both inside of work and outside of work. Do you know what I mean?
Yes,
So
yes, it's
I
very
have to
true.
take some responsibility for my well-being and my mental health. But my employer has to take some responsibility too. So I
Hmm.
could be the healthiest person in the world, but if I go into work and the workloads are just completely unachievable and my boss is really toxic and the culture's toxic and, again, I
Yeah.
could be really healthy, but if I go into that environment, it's not going to have a positive impact on me. So that tells us really it's a joint project. And I think there's a third, responsibility. And I think that's with the profession itself. So we
Oh.
talk about the individual, the organization, and the profession. And the
Hmm.
profession itself, I think, has a responsibility to be driving solutions, to be having conversations about the impact of the work on HR professionals, the mental
Hmm.
health impact on it, and acknowledging that emotional toll of the work. I
Hmm.
think they have a responsibility to be doing that. And I think they have a responsibility to be promoting and encouraging organizations to be thinking about what systems of support they need to be putting in place. So it's not wholly their responsibility. And certainly in the
Hmm.
UK, I see a lot of kind of bashing of the main kind of professional body in the UK.
Yeah.
People feel very strongly that they should be doing more. And I agree, but I don't think all the responsibility sits with them. I think it's a joint
Yeah.
project.
I I I love that. That's perfect. That makes sense to me. Where can someone learn more about you and the work you do? And I will put a link to the survey in the show notes.
I'd really encourage people to complete the survey. We'd really love that, and we'd like to get that much more global reach this time round. So that'd be fantastic. If people want to follow me and learn about what we're doing, so I'm on LinkedIn, Dr.
Mhm.
Joe Burrell on LinkedIn. Please find me there and follow me. I'm talking about HR well-being and support for HR pretty much every day on LinkedIn.
Mhm.
And then you can also come to our website, which is ultimateresilience.co.uk. And we're talking about our HR supervision service, which again, we'll talk about next time.
Oh, right.
So that's the
Yeah.
support service that we're now delivering for HR professionals
Yeah.
using those supervision models that I talked about earlier and that supervision approach. And you can learn lots more about us too. We've got lots of blogs. We've got our 2025 survey available that you can have a look at.
Mhm.
So yeah,
Mhm.
please do hop over and reach out.
Well, thanks, Joe. That was fascinating. Like, I really resonated with some of that and remain also super curious. I know I am going to be doing that survey. Uh, and then I'm going to be so curious that with all the attention that this is getting over the last year or so, what the participation rate is and what the outcome is. So last summer, I personally did an episode on some things I've learned on the show that have to do with succeeding in HR. A link to that's right here. Thanks for watching out there. We'll see you next time.